Okay, hello everybody and welcome to this Institute for Government event where I'm delighted that we're partnering with the Investment Association. I'm Jill Rutter, I'm a senior fellow here. So we finally got an industrial strategy after roughly a 9-month gestation, more or less, I think. So good things happen after 9 months with June's white paper. An exhaustive list of policy commitments. Don't think anyone can accuse the government of being short of policy in this area, or indeed short of strategies. And those are aiming to lay the foundation for a decade of growth, create hundreds of thousands of clean energy jobs, ensure every region thrives, and put Britain at the forefront of the technological revolution. There are quite a lot of quotation marks in that, which should be familiar to our panel. So we're going to be discussing today what we make of this industrial strategy. If industrial strategy, or having an industrial strategy, was the key to lifting the growth rate, then the UK would be powering ahead. We've had quite a lot of those. So what's going to be different this time round? So that's what we're going to be looking at. And to do that, I'm joined by a fantastic panel. So on my immediate right, I'm very delighted that we have Sam Lister, Director General for Industrial Strategy at the Department for Business and Trade. And I know with this audience online, don't need to tell you that Sam is a civil servant. So do not put your sort of political questions to him. And I will edit you out if you do. On my immediate left, Paul Nightingale. Paul is Professor of Strategy at the University of Sussex. Then on my far right, I'm really delighted that we've got Karen Northey. Karen is Corporate Affairs Director at the Investment Association. And then on my far left, our colleague Giles Wilkes, a senior fellow here at the Institute for Government, and a man who's probably written more industrial strategies than the rest of us have had mini quiches. So anyway, that's who we're going to go. So just for the format, going to kick off with a bit of chat between the panel, with some extremely patsy questions from me to get things going. We'll talk around and then we'll have questions. If you're in the room, you can either use Slido or put your hand up in time-honoured fashion. And then if you're on Slido, just start posting your questions. If you're on Slido and you could upvote ones that you think are pretty much what you wanted to ask, obviously not quite as good as well put as you would have done it, then please do that. And we will be finishing at 1:30 to allow you to make your long journeys back by whatever means you can. Room is filling up brilliantly, she said, to say. So let's kick off. Sam, as I said, we've seen quite a lot of attempts at industrial strategy in the last dozen years, two previous attempts, and some growth strategies as well. So if you were asked what's different about this one and what's going to make it different this time, what would your answer be?
Well, thank you, Jill, and thank you, everybody, for attending. So I've got a reasonable perspective on this because, for those of you who don't know, I was quite heavily involved in the industrial strategy from 2016 to 2019. So I've got a reasonably recent point of comparison to the exercise we're going through now. I guess my first reflection on similarities, I think both of them have been very thorough and extensive in the engagement that they've been doing and in the ambitions to partner with business, with local government, not to do this as a sort of solo exercise by government. I think where this industrial strategy is different is you can see we've done an extensive engagement. We have basically set ourselves the objective of how do we drive up business investment. That is our singular objective. I think last time round we were trying to do quite a few things across the economy. We are being narrower and more focused. The span of the engagement that we did was primarily about how do we make it quicker, easier, cheaper to invest in the UK, whether that is you growing your company in the UK, whether that is foreign direct investment into the UK, or whether that is exporting. There's always a bit of careful what you wish for in these exercises. So we did set out a number of questions. We got 27,500 answers back. So the analysts had a lot of fun, hence some of the 9 months of gestation, quite a lot of processing. But there were some very familiar themes that came out, and some more pronounced policy issues, knots, frictions that we needed to address. And as a result of that exercise, we have made a set of choices around what we are focusing on in terms of sectors. So we have got 8 high growth sectors chosen for their growth, but also their growth potential. We've got a set of frontier industries within those 8 high growth sectors that have a range of technologies where we have got particular sort of growth potential that we want to exploit. We have got a set of decisions around the markets that we want to get involved with. So where are the partnerships that we can build globally that are going to be particularly enhancing of the growth opportunities in the sectors that we are focusing on. And we've also made some decisions around place as well. And I think last time round in 2016 to 2019, that was quite a challenge. The politics was like very sort of knife edge. So you only needed a couple of parliamentarians to be offside or onside, and suddenly the exercise became quite a lot less stable. This time round, we've actually had a really thorough engagement with the mayors, the mayoral combined authorities, the devolved administrations, and said, where are your particular national level strengths in these sectors that you would want to have the sort of levers of government working to push behind. So we have made a set of choices. I think I would also say last time round, with the greatest respect to the administration I was working with as a civil servant then, there was quite a lot of scepticism that the administration was going to survive terribly long, and that scepticism was right, because it didn't. And unfortunately, as soon as it didn't, the industrial strategy collapsed with the change of administration. So between the May administration and the Johnson administration, so that sort of ended as an exercise. So I think this time round you've got cabinet consensus around a set of objectives. You've got it written strongly into the manifesto in terms of what people are going to try and achieve, and everybody pushing and consistently in one direction, and can be able to tell a story that this is a long-term commitment. Final reflection, I would just say, is and I choose my words delicate. Last time round, the relationship with the Treasury was not quite moving as one on the policy of industrial strategy. And I think I don't need to be the one to say that. You can read Gavin Barwell's reflections on some of the sort of mood music within the Treasury and within the Department for Business to work out that everything wasn't quite in lockstep. So as a result, quite a lot of the levers that we wanted to pull, we developed a policy framework, but where we were trying to drive the whole of government and decision making around that framework, which we can get into later, but I think we definitely are doing this time round. Last time round, we ended up working with the levers that basically existed within the Department for Business. So it was a more constrained exercise.
And just one question, which you can tell me is too cheeky, Sam. Change of Secretary of State, no difference? I mean, will we notice any sort of difference in approach from Peter Kurtz, obviously slightly earlier, you've already packed him onto a plane, but you think that actually there was enough buy-in to this that it's going to be resilient to cabinet changes?
It's a cross-cabinet commitment. There's sponsorship from the Department for Business and the Treasury sort of shared sponsorship for it. And I think if you went out to the business community and asked all those set of questions again, they'd come back with roughly the same response and say, please get on with it. So I think, and Peter Kurtz's arrival has been extremely positive. He's been very engaged, and he's also, in terms of the high growth sectors that we've been focusing on, he's actually been leading on 2 of them, digital and tech and life sciences. So we feel that there's a great deal of consistency there.
Brilliant. Okay, that's no doubt a relief for lots of people who have seen sort of ministerial changes lead to changes before. Karen, Sam's told us that actually the critical thing in this industrial strategy this time around is focus, that the UK has chronically underinvested for a long time, has really, really got to boost business investment, and also has some sort of vehicles now for enhanced public investment through the British Business Bank, the new National Wealth Fund, and GB Energy as well, lurking around. So does this strategy actually give sort of investors in the private sector what it needs now to mobilise the sort of investment on the scale that Sam's been talking about? Maybe you'd just like to tell us as well what the Investment Association is.
Well, I'll start there because I think it will give a bit of context. So the Investment Association is the industry body that represents investment managers that are based here in the UK. And they are, for those of you not familiar, the ones who are managing those pots of money, whether that be through your pension contributions or through your stocks and shares ISA. So they are the ones managing essentially other people's money, but they're the ones making the investment decisions on those pots of money that you see predominantly. About 75% are institutional money, so pensions type money, and about 25% from individuals who would be investing in their own pensions or their own ISAs. So very much at the heart of any conversation about investing and the need for investment in the country, it's a very key sector and a key part of the economy. And I think what is positive about the industrial strategy, and I would classify the industrial strategy and then the financial services growth and competitiveness strategy that sits underneath it as offering a huge amount of potential. So there is definitely the intention, and we have seen some pretty rapid movement and some rapid change. So lots of positive signs. A lot of this isn't things that you can change overnight. You can't build new infrastructure overnight. You can't change a culture of investing overnight. So these are all really important opportunities. But I think from the investment perspective, there's two really important features of the industrial strategy. One is the recognition of financial services more broadly, and particularly investment management, often called asset management, as a sector in and of itself deserving of priority. So we lead the way in financial services in the UK, and in investment management. We're the second largest investment management hub in the world, but the most international. So the US, which is a predominantly domestic market, is bigger, but it is a center, and the UK is ahead of the game and has been for a long time, but might not stay there. So recognizing that that in and of itself is worthy of attention. So services, often services get left behind in consideration of these things. But then secondly, all of the other sectors and all of the other ambitions for all the other sectors are dependent on investment. And that's not just, there is government investment. You mentioned some of the new vehicles and the sort of increased funding to things like the British Business Bank, which is fantastic. And one of the roles that they will be able to play is to facilitate private investment as well. So these are, talk about crowding in private investment. So collaborating in such a way with private investment so that these projects, these companies, they become investable for those managers who have literally a fiduciary legal duty to invest in a way that is in the best interest of their client. So I think that's, the two-pronged. One is the central role of investment across all of the sectors, but then also a recognition that the sector is really important. And then the other feature, I think, and you mentioned it, was collaboration. So the engagement with industry in terms of shaping this and the willingness to engage. And secondly, the cross-government collaboration, which is so important. And by that, I also mean regulation. I mean, I can't be a financial services representative and not talk about financial services regulation, because that is so critical to the ability of the industry to actually invest. And there's been a huge amount of progress and speed and transformation. We predominantly deal with the FCA, but the change in approach and risks and various other things like that. So I would say we've come out of it quite optimistic. As always, it's all about execution and delivery, and these things will take time. But
so, just a question on financial services regulation. The sort of Chancellor seems to have sort of two modes on that. One is it's got to be very light touch. All this stuff we put in place post-financial crisis. Maybe we've gone too far in restricting the abilities of lenders to lend, etc. She says, maybe mischaracterising. And then there's another mode which says, I've got to be quite dictatorial. So if you've got a pension fund, I want you to be investing in these sorts of assets and stuff like that, rather than you just choose whatever you think is best for your future pension beneficiaries? Do you think the government's actually got a coherent view of where it wants to go on financial services regulation?
I should caveat by saying I did spend 10 years as a regulator as well before I moved.
That's another reason I was going to ask you that, Karen.
So having spent about 10 years at the FCA. And I think what has been clear and what has changed is a agreement between, and I'll stick to the FCA, it's what I know best, so, and acceptance. And actually the new competitiveness and growth objective, secondary objective for the regulators, was actually brought in under the last government. But we've seen huge changes in how regulators are operating already, and an alignment, so Nikhil Rathi, former Treasury official, then the London Stock Exchange, and now at the regulator, a commitment to moving forward on that. And actually it's not about light touch regulation, and I don't think anyone would talk about it being light touch regulation, but we have found ourselves in a position where risk is bad. Well, and if anyone invests, you know, risk is part of risk and return are part of the whole. There were some things that are definitely bad, and I don't think anyone in our industry or in financial services more broadly would encourage light touch, step back, let's not regulate, because actually one of the things that have made the UK, the successful global hub it is in financial services, is an effective regulatory regime. But there is also a time to recognize that there's been inadvertent consequences of saying risk is bad. You know, I can put my money in a, you know, if you put your money in a bank account that's paying less interest than inflation, is that a harm? But that's not, you know, but if I say I want to invest in something that over time, you know, over a horizon has shown, traditionally has, you know, been in the best interests of those who are investing, is that risky? So we think, you know, risk is part of life, and I think there has been an attempt to eliminate all risk. And you know, I think in regulation, on a personal view, there's always pendulums, right? So, and you know, for good cause, right? We had the global financial crisis, and then, you know, things go, and then you've got to rebalance it a little bit. But so I think there's been a real concentrated effort and probably, you know, an active role by Treasury in regulation that we haven't seen for some time. But, you know, for the most part, I think a lot of that has been welcome. I don't think you're not showing, and there has been no sort of, you know, bonfire of the rule book, and nor would anyone ask for one. So it's been an increase in pace, but a good one.
Excellent. That's, I think that's reassuring. That's good. Paul, you're a sort of strategy expert. So Sam, I think, drew some really interesting contrasts between a sort of, you know, what I might call a sort of weak department strategy, the last one where the department just has to do it all itself and can't persuade anyone else in Whitehall to do it, and something that genuinely actually is a cross-government effort. But do you think this strategy is sort of well set up? Has it identified the right objectives, and has it actually linked coherent policies to the outcomes that it wants to see?
Right. Okay. So strategy professor hat on here.
Strategy professor hat. I love that.
If you're going to do good strategy, there's a number of things you need to do. So one, you need to identify what the key challenges and opportunities are, which is often very difficult. You need to diagnose what is driving those problems or those opportunities. You need to identify a small number of interventions that will allow you to change that. You need to implement it effectively, which is very difficult in government because you've got so many different departments going on. And then this is a huge strategy with many different interacting parts. And ideally, you want to ensure that all the things you are doing reinforce each other so they achieve more than the sum of their parts. If you can't do that, at least make sure that they don't clash with each other and work against each other. And that's really, really difficult to do. And then you need to review what you're doing because the world changes and new things kind of develop. So in terms of kind of looking at the process for this, which I followed quite closely and looking at the document, and I should say strategies are what organisations do, not what they write down in strategy documents. So sometimes you want to leave things out of a strategy document. But so following the process, I think it has been a good process. I think this is as Giles has kind of repeatedly shown you, there's been a long history of learning and backsliding and moving forward on developing strategy. So I think this is good. I think this is an improvement on what went before. And it's not bad strategy. So bad strategy is if you go for, oh, we're going to do something vacuous, like the Brits are so good at this. We're going to win the global race on X, which was a big issue. If there's no analysis, or if things work against each other. And this looks like something that doesn't have those flaws. So I do think it is good. There has been a problem in the past. All those different actions are difficult to do. And if organisations can't do them, they default to something we call garbage can decision making. So this is a technical term. It doesn't mean garbage bad. It means that you have a whole load of things that you want to do that are in the garbage can. And someone comes along and says, I need someone for this. And you search around and you find something and say, this fits, we should do this. And that is better than doing nothing, but it doesn't give you that proper kind of strategic benefit. And I think we've got much less of that in this. So I am positive. And in particular, there's a sentence which I think is, if this was an MBA class, I'd be giving it a 10 out of 10. Our priority is to deliver strong, secure, sustainable economic growth to boost living standards of working people in every part of the UK. That is a really nice summary of a strategy. So I think it's good.
Okay, brilliant. I'm getting lots of questions in about the implementation, diving down a level, which I'm going to come to next. But Giles, you've seen industrial strategies come and go. So what do you think the sort of big lessons from previous attempts are that Sam and colleagues need to bear in mind for this one?
Thank you, Jill. I would say, to give you a bit of context, I was there when Vince Cable, I was his special advisor during Vince Cable's stint as business secretary, where he decided, actually it wasn't his plan when he came in, but we need to do something about growth. Why don't we resurrect Lord Mandelson's industrial strategy in effect? And we got a good sort of constrained industrial strategy going, what we could bargain within the coalition. And then I was chosen very bizarrely for Lib Dem to sit within Downing Street for the last 2.5 years of Theresa May's and try and work on that industrial strategy with Sam there. And I would say, so what lessons have been learned? Number one, it does involve making choices. And as Sam's opening remarks illustrate, there have been a lot of choices made here. I would say I was particularly critical at the time of the one that we were doing under Theresa May, that we went to people and said, hey, all of you sectors are important. We love you all. You should all have an industrial strategy. As a result, the business levels of professional business services firms went through the roof as everybody came up with their sector plan. I think there were 57, and there were 39 local industrial strategies being produced. And the idea was somehow some combination of Sam and a few other officials in the middle were then going to go through them, ticking and crossing them or something. That isn't being strategic. It's not choosing. And even though there were clear statements of what they were trying to achieve, and I think the phrase that was chosen was boosting everybody's earning power, which sounds like a great thing. It was nothing like as clear as getting business investment up, which is really good as a really strong statement for if you had to choose one thing that's gone wrong in this economy for the last sort of 50 years. We haven't had high enough business investment. So they have nailed that one, and they've put it in every single sector plan. We are trying to raise business investment. It's not only a good objective, it's a good kind of intermediary one. Like if people are not coming to you saying we want to invest, then your conversations are not working. So I think they've learned from that. I think they've definitely learned that if you don't have the whole of government interested, you're going to just be struggling the whole time. I mean, when we got industrial strategy really going under Vince, it was a bargain. It was like, if the Treasury gets to do whatever they want to do on tax or like marriage tax allowances or something, we get to have a little money to help the aerospace industry. I mean, that's a terribly short-sighted transactional way of doing things, and it's one that, as a result, industry looks and goes, well, are you really committed here? What if a different configuration of politicians comes in and they're not going to support it? So this one was committed to long before the election by the Labour opposition then. It changed by the time it came in, partly because the economic circumstances changed. We went from being potentially in a demand hole after the COVID pandemic to one where the supply crisis and inflation are massive problems, and it's all about how do we use the nation's resources for in the best way, which is a very different kind of question. But they kept at the idea of industrial strategy. The Chancellor supported it, as again Sam alluded to. Philip Hammond was quite a dry Chancellor. I thought he was a good one, but he was sceptical towards most of the ideas of industrial strategy, which meant, again, bargaining the whole time. And the big pot of money they had for boosting investment, something called the National Productivity Investment Fund, wasn't really there for Sam and I and the other people to play with, which was absolutely devastating for all of us. Because actually a little money can go a very long way in industrial strategy. So I think that sort of whole of government approach, I think the engagement is as something we were doing before. but also the identification of business investment and making some real choices.
Okay, is there enough money? This question that was coming online. Is there enough money behind this? I mean, someone's saying that, there actually isn't that much money in the strategy. So is it really enough to move the dial?
It's not as well. I mean, I was reading an article in The Economist about how China does it, which is always a very dispiriting occasion. But China puts 2% of GDP into boosting innovation, which in our world would be like £65 billion a year. It doesn't have £65 billion a year. In fact, if you go to the OECD database, the Quantifying Industrial Strategies one, and you strip out the pointless tax subsidies for being a small company or things like that, you end up with like a tiny proportionate amount of money. So I think this one is what you might kindly call an Anglo-Saxon one, which is about getting the levers of government pointing in the right direction and then saying, are there enough resources? Well, there certainly are in the private sector. No pressure, Karen. But, so there are potentially resources to support it, but it's not all going to be pumped in through the taxpayer.
All right, Karen wanted to
I was
come in.
actually going to pick up on that point, which is, if you're looking for investment, if you're a firm or you're building a bridge or a highway or whatever it is, everyone talks about investment, but what is investment? So is there money behind it? Well, is that just government money just being handed over, raised through taxes or anything? But actually what you really want is, true investment coming from investors, right? And that's all of us in our contributions to pensions or our or how we're saving and investing. But so there's a few things that are being done which will grow the pie, right? So there's the government money, and leaving that aside because lots of challenging fiscal positions and everything else. But then it's like, how do you take this private money and how do you expand the money that is available? So that's critical question number one. And there's lots of things being done, and particularly around convincing more people to invest. Is a big one. Then there's how do you make sure the money that is there comes to investments here in the UK? Because that's the other big question. And that has to be, those investments have to be the right investments. They have to be investable. And so with a small amount of money and initiatives and things being done, for example, I'm not saying it's tiny amounts of money, but through the National Wealth Fund and the British Business Bank and various other initiatives, to make those projects more investable. And we've seen, some of those changes don't cost money at all. It has to do with policy and regulation. But so there are ways to increase the amount of investment that doesn't involve the government putting government money in. And I think that's the important role. And I think the recognition of investment as part of the strategy is a big one.
Sam, you want to come in, but I'm going to give you an added question.
Go on.
From Anonymous, which is probably someone who works for you. Sam mentioned places and choice. Given that the vast majority of funding will be funneled through the mayoral combined authorities, are there risks this leads to disparities in the majority of the population at the moment not under an MCA?
So, no, I don't think so. I mean, I think we are definitely using the mayoral combined authority, the mayoral strategic authority structure to think about what are the sort of regional contributions to a sort of UK national picture of growth. The mayors have been really engaged, really thoughtful. I mean, lots of sort of really deep conversations about where the particular strengths lie in particular regions and what the sort of ecosystem is that needs to be around those areas to get the most out of it. I think the risk of sort of taking interpreting the political position, there is an incentive to encourage people to be part of mayoral strategic authorities. That is the direction that the government wants to push in terms of the devolution agenda. So if you're missing out a little bit by not being as far down the conveyor belt on becoming a mayoral strategic authority, this should be the incentive to sort of encourage you to go further. I would also say that, it is not exclusively operating through that framework. We did the defence industrial strategy.
Oh, I've got a question about that.
Yesterday.
Where does that fit in? That's another question.
Well, that's one of our 8 high growth sectors. So we are prioritising that, and that's a really important one because there's a lot of public money going into it, and there's an enormous amount of opportunity in terms of the supply chains that it supports, the innovation ecosystem that you can drive for that money. But you look, there are commitments within the defence industrial strategy, which is the defence sort of sector plan, to particular parts of the country that aren't in sort of mayoral strategic authorities, but are growth zone areas that have particular sort of relevance to the defence industry. So we're not exclusively looking at it through sort of mayoral strategic authorities, and obviously also we are thinking about the UK as a whole and the 4 nations of the UK. So we have got an interministerial group this afternoon where the ministers are getting together to discuss, exactly that sort of implementation at a UK level.
Excellent. I'm going to come with one more question to Paul, and then I'm going to come to the audience. Well, it's a couple of questions about prioritisation. You said, prioritisation was mattered. Said I think they mean the industrial strategies picked 8 priority sectors, but how many sectors are there in total? So is 8 basically shorthand for everything, or is 8 a really sort of quite focused pick if you look at the sort of landscape? And then related to that, what about the rest of the economy, the bits of the economy that aren't identified, out for special treatment? What's going on there? Paul,
okay, so there's
first go at that.
So there's 8 sectors, and underneath that there's 37 industries, and how many they are. I'm going to be an academic here. Depends on how you define them. So how you divide it up will give you the kind of answer to that. But there are quite large chunks of the economy that are not within this, and there has been a choice that's made, and that is a difficult thing for governments to do, and it is a very positive thing that has happened. And they've selected those based on analysis of what sectors and industries out there in the UK economy have potential to deliver growth. So in some ways it is a good thing. I'm very pleased that they have moved away from everyone has jam. The kind of underlying assumption behind that is if you focus on those high growth sectors, then you will get growth, you'll get more investment, and that will raise all boats. Whether that turns out to be true is an open question. I think it is, if they are successful, it's likely that it will be true. It will just increase demand in the economy, which will boost kind of other sectors. So I think it's a good choice. It is always difficult when you are doing industrial strategy to make choices about sectors. So if we always focus on the ones we're good at, we'd still be doing steam engines. And then if you're looking at sectors of the future, then there's always going to be kind of massive uncertainty and really difficult to understand in an international division of labour what are the things that the UK is going to be good at and which bits of those sectors we are going to be good at. So if you look at the life science strategy, the Irish life science strategy has focused on manufacturing, and that's been really, really successful. We've had a bigger focus on kind of the research end. So looking at where the UK is within those global value chains and being able to move up those global value chains is a kind of a key success determinant on this. And I am reasonably hopeful about that because this is very, rather than picking winners, it's creating the conditions for winners to emerge. And that, I think, is a big difference. Going back to the 70s, I mean, this has been a push since the 70s. So, but I think this is one of the times where we can really see that at work.
And what about if I'm left out? I mean, I'm sitting there, and maybe I just didn't quite make the cut to be a priority, one of the 37 industries or whatever. The
ones outside the 37 will benefit from the spillovers. So if we improve business investment, then we will improve business investment for the whole of the UK. There isn't going to be a barrier that will stop kind of other sectors getting access to investment. And I think the push towards supporting the big cities will make kind of big changes there. So it is not going to be everyone, and that is a good thing because successful strategy requires you to make difficult choices.
And Karen, just very quickly, and then we'll really come to you. What difference does it make to the financial services sector to be identified in this as a sort of priority sector? Does it change the way we do policy around financial services?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really significant. And I think part of that is, there is historically, a focus on goods and rather than services. And I think financial services is one of the things that the UK is good at. But it's very easy to overlook that as an industry itself, it has its own needs in addition to what it can provide to all the other sectors. So whether that be good regulation, policy, so all of those things. And in some, I've worked in a few different sectors that are regulated, but few to the level that financial services is in terms of how it operates. So I think the attention and the recognition and the ability to move quickly on some of the key deliverables, whether that be, the focus on competitiveness and growth in regulation, tearing down some of the barriers that have stopped people investing, stopped people getting advice on how to invest. A lot of those things make a really big difference, actually.
Brilliant. Now you've all got here. So that's brilliant. So let's have some questions. So we've got two. My God, we've got loads of questions.
Yeah.
I'm going to start down here. We will come to everybody, particularly if people can keep this brief. And as the gentleman there shows, if you are in the other room, come in. Yes, could you tell us very quickly, and let's keep questions sort of short and snappy, so we'll get lots of whatever.
Yeah. So Purdy Fraser, I'm on the board of various deep tech, government deep tech accelerator and deep tech companies. Just two very quick questions. Beyond our science base, how do people, particularly investment association, see the UK value proposition when compared to our other locations such as South Korea or Germany or Italy as investment locations in these sectors? And the other question is, what are the primary policy levers for converting our deep tech strengths, which we really have and we really are globally leading in, but into companies that stay here and aren't bought out? So I guess, that's a policy question on...
Yes, and next to you, we'll take them in threes, yeah.
Danny Bars, I'm retired from financial services and various other things. I was concerned that the panel hasn't actually discussed productivity rather than investment. And I'd just like to have some comments about what is the difference, and also the notion of identifying investment rather than just spending.
Okay, yeah. And let's just go immediately behind. I'll be very productive here and get people very close together.
My name is Chaco van der Sijp from Innovate UK. It's very impressive, the industrial strategy. It looks very slick, easy to read. So should disseminate quite quickly. So my compliments. You have been sifting through 27,000 consultation contributions. And I know that AI has been used as an aid, which has the risk that you end up in an echo chamber, hearing the same things, enforcing the same things. Surely you wanted to have also included some courageous ideas, which are a bit more unusual. How did you strike that balance? And what do you think are examples of very courageous suggestions in this industrial strategy?
Okay, and I'm actually going to just go to the gentleman who's having to stand up. So in case you want
I'm
to go
Billy
sit down
James.
again.
I'm a chartered accountant and I've been the director of several investment banks. My question is, how many people devising strategy have personally started a business or have had a senior role in a private sector business?
Okay, that's all very good. That's a very nice, brief question. Let's start with this first one. To Karen, how does the UK stack up as a competitive offer for people, internationally mobile capital, which can choose where to go? And maybe then link it to the question about how do we actually get people to stay here once we've created a business, because we've seen quite a lot of sellouts to Japanese or Korean or other firms, haven't we?
Look, I think I mentioned some of the positives about the UK and why it has become the centre that it has for financial services and for investment. Capital is international; it does flow across borders, so it is a competitive market. And as someone who's depending on my my pension when I retire, I want investors to spend it where the best return is. So So absolutely, we have to target on how do we make capital flow to the UK, and I think. The key to that is making sure there are investable projects. I think it's around making sure that the policy framework for operating is as positive as it can be. And I think there are a lot of steps already identified in the strategy. I think we need to move quickly. I think particularly when it comes to technology, there are centres, whether that be on tokenization or digital, where the regulation has enabled them to move quickly. So I think there's definitely an opportunity to be better, but our members already are investing, 1.4 trillion pounds into the UK, into UK businesses and projects. So it's not like it's definitely attractive, and I think it's in everyone's interest for the UK to be more attractive for investment. In terms of the challenges around capital markets, so I assume that we're, lots of conversations around, rejuvenating the IPO market, the capital markets, and I think there have been some regulatory changes. I think it's in everyone's benefit that we have sort of deep and liquid capital markets. So both public markets, so those things that are listed on the stock exchange, but also a huge amount of focus now being put on private markets. So those companies that are not going public. So how do we get funding into those? How do we encourage those kind of markets to grow? And I think that's really important. And I think there's certainly a lot of work done by some very good institutions like, the British Business Bank, the National Wealth Fund. It's that scale up. So as a nation, we're generally seen as really good at startup. And it's that scale up, it's that next step. So how do we do that? And that's a lot about the business environment in which we operate in. So, there's definitely a recognition, I think, in the strategy of the need to do that.
Giles, this question about why aren't we talking about productivity here? We have lots of productivity, and I want to link this. I'm going to come to both you and Paul on this one, about, how does this industrial strategy fit in to the government's wider growth strategy, its desire to raise living standards and things like that? How do we nest these things properly together?
And I'll try and do that in 1 minute, shall I?
Yeah.
So, okay. First, you also asked the difference between just investment and straight spending. In definitional terms, straight spending only has its impact in the period it's spent. Investment is something that takes a longer time to count. So if your kid says to you, pay for my sushi this evening, Dad, it's going to be a real investment, unless they can show that it's going to benefit you for many years afterwards, spoiler alert, they can't, then it's not investment. So it's got to have a long, we should be sceptical. Politicians sometimes use the phrase investment when they really mean spending. Why do we not talk about productivity? We do talk about productivity, and in many ways you should say that our growth problem is a productivity problem. In other words, we've been very good on the whole at putting labour into the labour market. We haven't been good at keeping the product per unit of labour, either per hour or per job, rising hard. The reason we focus on investment is the biggest component in that fall in productivity growth has probably been the lack of a decent capital stock to be worked with. But I do worry that too much of a focus on that highly visible thing does mean that the other factors behind productivity, in particular the loss of dynamism and churn in the market, in other words, people moving jobs, companies starting and failing and growing and so forth, that part is going to be neglected. It's one of my big concerns about an industrial strategy government. How does it fit within? I would say, in a sense, and also reflecting on Paul's earlier question, the question put to Paul about how do you deal with the excluded sectors, the government should be very clear that most of the economy and most of the growth answer is going to come through things that it doesn't have a sector plan for. It's going to be 80% of the economy is going to benefit in all sorts of ways through things like getting dynamism working again, raising the skill level in the economy, raising our exposure to big markets like, for example, the European Union. This sort of thing is what's going to make a much bigger difference, that no matter how brilliant the stuff within Sam's bailiwick works, most of it is going to be outside of there, and actually understanding very clearly and policing the frontier between industrial strategy and the rest of it is an important part of the job.
Paul, do you want to come in on any of that? I'm particularly interested in whether you, when you look at these strategies, sort of veteran of these things, whether when you look at, you can say, actually, this time I can seriously say that the Treasury and the business department are on the same page.
I think that's true, and I think there are some really kind of interesting and quite subtle kind of changes. So there has been this concern in the UK about, we build companies and then they go off to the US. That is an issue. But at the same time, we really need to be clear that UK companies also buy technology from the US. They buy technology from elsewhere. So we don't want to have a kind of, move towards a kind of yeah, exactly. Now, there's an interesting kind of flavour emerging, particularly in the defence industrial strategy, where there's a hint about a shift towards thinking seriously about a national sovereign capability, which I think is really, really important in defence. And that's kind of been a bit of a taboo subject. And I think that barrier has now been breached. And I think that the kind of direction of travel here and the kind of collaboration is a really nice kind of balance there. Now, in terms of kind of, what the benefits are for the kind of the deep tech, I think regulatory. I think we've got a very intelligent regulatory environment that's fast. I think kind of things like sandpits are really, really clever. I think there's a huge amount of talent in the UK. There are gaps, trying to get lab space, trying to get anything kind of cheap. I think kind of, in terms of investment, the kind of regulatory environment for investment is really good. So this kind of pushing out the problem solving to a much more local level to be address those coordination problems is a really, really big change and a very, very important one there. So I do think there's a lot going on there, and we do need to kind of keep pushing the government about making sure that investment works. We're really good at supporting and de-risking a lot of VC investment. We could do more. I'll stop.
So, Paul, if I was Kemi Badenoch or Nigel Farage, maybe Richard Tice, I would say that actually the net zero strategy and the obsession with getting to 95% clean power by 2030 actually makes all this for the birds, because all it's doing is shoving up energy costs, driving business offshore, and actually the government sees all the sunlit uplands, loads of job opportunities, but actually trying to get to net zero on that timetable is basically undermining the rest of your industrial and growth strategy. Discuss.
That's a fun question. So no. Quickly. So we do. I mean, there is this kind of issue about strategies should be focused, and we've got a couple of pools. We've got an international security pool, which is changing government's priorities, and we've got this net zero thing that we do need to address. There are problems in the UK energy market, and the problems that we face today go back a long period of time around the dash for gas that we assume would drive down costs, and then there's been kind of the war in Ukraine. So there is a focus here on energy costs, and I think kind of I should probably hand over to somebody who knows much more about it than me. I am not entirely convinced that a lot of the fuss that's made about energy costs are actually as big an issue as people suggest. So Tom Forth did some nice analysis looking at energy-intensive companies, and basically found that the cost of energy, even for energy-intensive companies, wasn't as big as was being suggested. But there is clearly action on energy costs in here. I should hand over to an expert on this.
Sam, do you want to say anything about, and then I'm going to give you these questions about how you used AI to do that, and actually how you got sort of people who've actually business to actually have a sort of big say on the industrial strategy.
And I guess it's sort of slightly to the question about, where are the big ideas or the big asks that have been put to the consultation process, and hopefully have some proposals within the industrial strategy. So on electricity prices, so I guess Paul and I may diverge slightly on this. I mean, the UK is currently deeply uncompetitive on electricity prices, and it doesn't require us to do a consultation on it. I mean, I speak to business every day of the week, and it comes up as one of the most prominent themes when they are working out and they are globally mobile where they're going to go. We are basically 160 quid per megawatt hour, and on the league table, the next one up on the sort of cost league table is at about 130. The intervention that we are doing will get us into the sort of late 110s, like 115, 120. That gets us up to close to the sort of middle of the league table, as opposed to right at the bottom of the league table. That is important, not just because it will benefit 8,000 businesses, and we've got to work out a consultation how we would apply that measure, but actually the signal it puts out that we take this stuff really seriously. On energy as well, one of the other things that came back very strongly was grid connection. So investors will turn up in the UK, they'll go, we want to be based in this part of the country, we'll sort of facilitate all of it, and then the answer will come back, yes, you want to put the plug in the wall and start everything going, that will be 7 years. which is completely unacceptable and unworkable in terms of, an investor proposition. So we are now doing a load of work on a connection acceleration service that can prioritise grid connections for the most important investors into the UK or within the UK. So I would say, and those are big ideas as well, I think, in terms of...
So does AI help you actually access more things? Because just reading 27,000 things...
So there's a little bit of me that wished the team had used a bit more AI, because it took quite a long time. But I think it definitely wasn't an echo chamber. Yeah, there's some help in terms of drawing out the sort of core themes.
An echo chamber if everybody gets AI to write their submission in, though.
True, oh, yes. but actually the whole point was, every single one, and this is slightly comes to the question of, who's involved, who's ever run a business. The sector plans that we've devised, we've got an industrial strategy and 8 sector plans. Those have been co-owned, co-created by business councils from each of those sectors. That very deliberately, this has not been a Whitehall exercise. I mean, I've spent half my life in the private sector. That does not mean that I am a font of all knowledge on the approach to the private sector. We need the deep experts from those specific sectors and from those frontier industries that can really help shape and think through what the sort of issues are. So you can gather together the sort of feedback from the 27,000 sort of answers, but actually you then need to put it through multiple layers of engagement to really test and challenge where is the real sort of need. Because we are being interventionist, but we are being deliberately targeted in those interventions, and we cannot do all the interventions. So where are we going to have the maximum bang for the buck?
Okay, let's have some more questions. Okay, we didn't do this room, so let's do a sort of from the back. Let's do 4 on this side. Let's do the 4 on this side. So as quick as possible. So, yeah.
Jill, panel, thank you very much. My name is Tim Barnes. I'm the director of the Centre for Entrepreneurs. We're a think tank. You've talked a lot about the sectors, Paul and others, and the value of investment and doubling down where we are. This is one of the 3 best places in the world to start a business. There is almost nothing in the industrial strategy about support for starting a business. 96% of the references are to start up and scale up as a phrase. All the emphasis is on scale up. The government has put 40% of the startup support in the UK on notice of being ended. We will get no more scale-ups if we don't start more companies. Okay. How are you going to do something about that?
Brilliant. Yes, and just in front of you.
Thank you, David Robinson, Market News. Quick question, follow-up from Jill's really, which is, given the time lags you've got on investments, and given Sam's opening remarks about how great it is to have unity around a cabinet, don't you have to persuade investors that this is going to survive a change in government? Isn't that already a concern? If you look at the polls, if you look at the political headlines, it doesn't look terribly politically stable.
Okay, and then there, yes. Sorry. Just wait for the mic. Then we can, so everybody at home can hear as well. Yes.
David Whiten from The Times. Obviously, quite a lot of the actual programmes on the ground that will be part of the strategy will be similar or the same as they were in the past. Obviously, it's very important that it's part of a coherent, stable, credible strategy. But is that difference, do you think, does that explain a significant part of the low level of aggregate investment compared to other countries? Or is it a nice to have, or could it explain a chunk of that, of the relatively low level of aggregate investment?
Okay, and shall we do, I think there was one other person who wanted, yes, there. This is my productivity. We usually only do 3, but I'm doing 4, so, yeah.
Question for Giles, really, but I think Sam's interested in this too. You made some comments a few weeks ago, I think essentially saying that policymakers, when they're considering specific interventions, shouldn't get too hung up on identifying market failures and demonstrating additionality. Have I understood you correctly there? And if so, why do you think that's a concern? Sorry for leaping on what may have been a throwaway comment there.
And you are, so Giles remembers?
Andrew Pickering from the Business Department.
Okay, right. Okay, Giles, do you want to take that one?
Oh, my Lord.
out
I've got to be
first?
careful what I put on Blue Sky at 2 in the morning. So not to be too obsessed with market failures and debt, but I guess to get sort of all purple prosy about this quickly, the point of industrial strategy is to change the structural circumstances, not simply reflect them and be efficient within them. So I guess if I'm to try and explain my midnight tweets in some way, I would say that if all you do is search around looking for where there might be a market failure or make sure that you've got some additionality, you might end up just remaining within the structure you've actually got. And I think I was very inspired by an excellent speaker that a rival think tank brought in called Jigar Shah, who was worked for the Loan Programs Office in the United States. And this is basically doling out billions and billions of Bidenomics money. And when I listened to him speak, I thought we used to get stuck at this point where we'd set up an institution like the Business Bank or the Green Investment Bank or something, and we'd go, well, is it commercial because we don't want to waste money? If it is commercial, why isn't the private sector doing it? If it isn't commercial, then we're just wasting money or distorting. We'd get stuck at this theological point and nothing would happen. Whereas you listen to him and he would say, look, I would know perfectly well in 2012 that solar power was going to grow, needed financing, wasn't getting the financing, and so I was putting the state money in. And it was this beautifully clear, forthright and positive vision that was that sort of assertiveness that would get stopped if he stopped and went, oh, I'm really worried about dead weight. Let's first of all do a massive analysis. So not wishing to downplay the brilliant analysis that you guys do, sometimes the politicians need to set out and say, I'm changing the structure. I'm not worrying about that stuff. That's my best explanation anyway.
Okay, you can take it up with Giles outside whether you're convinced by his answer. Let's go to this question for David about what explains the low level of sort of equity investment in the UK. Karen, do you, I mean...
What explains a sort of current...
Yeah, I mean, are we, you know, equity phobic? I mean, there's Chancellor seems to think we're quite equity...
I didn't really mean
what did you mean?
Business, yeah.
Sort of why we've ended up as a culture that doesn't...
Not by investors, but
by businesses.
By businesses. In terms of why they're not investing, and is this the policy certainty, you know, the political certainty point that you raised?
how big a deal is having a coherent industrial policy for the aggregate level of investment in the economy?
So look, policy certainty and predictability is a key factor in making investment decisions, right? Because it has a direct impact on risk. And so when you're an investment officer and you're sitting and is this a good investment? You know, what is my risk? And then, you know, the experts around the globe who do these sort of things are expert in factoring in what is the geopolitical risk, because that is a key factor in all decision making. So policy certainty, absolutely, it does bring down risk. It makes it more certain, and therefore, you know, it improves that sort of risk-return balance. So it's definitely an important feature, and where we have massive changes in policy, it has a direct impact. So, you know, if you can't, you'll see that, you know, institutional investors, you know, retail investors, people react, markets react when there are massive changes. I think look across the Atlantic, and there's been lots of ups and downs in the stock market. So I think policy certainty is really important. That being said, you know, governments change all the time, all the way around the world, and that's no different here than it is in other jurisdictions. So, but it does have an impact on the risk.
And yes, Paul.
So on that specifically, the University of Nottingham Economics Department puts out a survey to, I think, 10,000 CFOs of companies. And a very, very clear message that comes through from that is that policy uncertainty does constrain investment. Sorry, I can't remember the name.
No. I remember when I worked in the private sector briefly, and we were looking at investing in an area that was very exposed to policy risk, and we concluded that governments always change their policies 2 years into this. So if you didn't get the payback within 2 years, you didn't invest, because it clearly was just going to be completely nugatory spending because of the policy environment there. I'm going to come to this question, Karen. I'm going to come to you first, and then I want everybody about, you know, is the industrial strategy sort of anti-startup? Is it, question from Tim.
Do you want to come to me?
Yeah, I'm going to come to you.
So look, definitely not. You know, we are extremely keen to have a vibrant business environment right from the sort of, you know, the startup side. And if you look at the investment through the spending review on things like the business growth service and some of the other sort of really on the ground sort of initiatives, we want to absolutely encourage that. I think how we look at the the sort of ecosystems that we are creating by bringing in big investment. So the BAE Systems deal that with the Norwegian government that got signed last week, that is 400 companies in the supply chain and a commitment, over multi-decade sort of commitment that really is there to sort of foster an entire business ecosystem. And there will be businesses that will be contributing to that do not exist at the moment, that need to be coming on board to be able to service that sort of enormous and really exciting contract. I would say I think the new Secretary of State will be really interested in the start-up and scale-up environment. That is something that the Department for Science and Innovation Technology thinks a lot about, as well as the Department for Business. So I think there will be a good synergy there. Can I just quickly, Jill, on David's point as well? I mean, just to sort of underline, ultimately, and it slightly answers or attempts to answer the question on sort of changes of government and the rest. We do want a policy framework that is deeply, deeply consistent as it possibly can be. So I think when you look at the choices that we are making in the industrial strategy, and then you look at the decisions of the allocation of money through the spending review, you look at how R&D is being allocated, £23 billion a year going out to sort of R&D priorities. Again, that will be consistent, deeply consistent with priorities in the industrial strategy. You look what we're trying to do in regulation, where we're trying to do regulatory innovation, all that sort of stuff, deeply consistent. You can even look at stuff where the sort of emphasis is not necessarily on the surface, a pro-growth intervention. So you look at some of the, policies in the immigration white paper, actually where there are, constraints on access to skilled worker visas. The exemptions are the industrial strategy professions that will support those high growth sectors. And that is a sort of negotiation and agreement within government that these are the important priorities that you've got to push forward.
Paul, you want to come in, and then I'm going to put one last question to all of you. Paul.
So just on the thinking behind this kind of focus on kind of scale-ups rather than kind of startups. So there's very, very high levels of startups in the UK. So there's a kind of a key thing. Most new firms are small. Most small firms are old. Okay? Most new firms are small. Most small firms are old. So the problem isn't necessarily getting more stuff in there. There's very, very high failure rates in the first 5 years of small firms. It's allowing them to grow. And the problem that the UK has is a lack of dynamism in the economy. And we want to move away from a situation where we have churn. Now, I think the industrial strategy will encourage more entrepreneurship, and there's a clear recognition in the thinking behind it, even if it didn't get in the document, that startups are really, really important. But there needs to be kind of getting the barriers out the way to allow those firms to grow. It's the growth is the key thing, because we start up lots and lots of firms and then they don't actually go anywhere. We need to create an environment where they can be kind of more dynamic, and I think that's in there.
So should Rachel Reeves in the budget do things that you could regard as presenting a barrier to incentivising growth, like reduce the VAT registration threshold, or rethink again the way she's done employer NICs, which says don't employ too many people?
I mean, so the data is really, really clear on when firms get to a level of turnover where they hit the VAT threshold, they stop growing. So there are these kind of weird kind of policy barriers that we could sort out. I'm going to hand over to kind of people with more expertise than me on this.
Okay, so I'm going to stop you all there, but ask one final question. One sentence answers, because we're against time. I'm going to start with Giles, because he works with me, so I can pick on him first. If we're here in a year's time, what's the one thing that you're going to be looking for if we put you on a panel on, has the industrial strategy started working? What's going to be your litmus indicator?
Okay, Jill, prepare for a Proustian length sentence here then. As a result, no, actually, to steal everybody else's best answer, really I would like to be seeing an uptake in business investment, either delivered or investment intentions, as expressed in some reputable surveys, if such things exist.
Paul?
Uptake in business investment.
Uptick in business investment.
Yeah, the business deals need to land and they need to be creating high quality jobs.
And Karen, final word.
I'm gonna flip it and say something different. I would, definitely that. But actually, the increase in investable projects for businesses to invest in. So that's the private-public partnership. So if there are genuinely things on the list that are investable on the basis of activities the government's undertaken.
I'm going to close it there. Thank you all so much for coming. Could I ask you to thank our fantastic panel? And could I thank Sam for coming? It's very good to have Sam on the panel. And could I thank the Investment Association for partnering with us on this event. So thank you all very much. And you can watch the video time and time again when you get home if you missed anything, and tell all your friends.
I'm glad you got to weigh in on the staff.